Okay, picture this. You walk into a medical clinic, you're handed a patient file, and right away, you realize you're dealing with a highly complex, potentially volatile case. Today in this explainer, we're looking at a completely brilliant and honestly, a slightly terrifying medical experiment conducted by clinical neurologist Dr. Daniel Zhuang. He basically walked up to the medical community and some very special diagnostic tools and presented them with a mysterious case study he called Patient Zero. Now, I'm not going to spoil the true identity of this patient just yet, because the journey to uncovering who or what they actually are is absolutely fascinating. It challenges literally everything we think we know about cognition, behavior, and the tools we use every single day.
So, grab your virtual stethoscope for a second, because we're going to try and diagnose this mysterious, highly problematic individual together. Dr. Zhuang carefully documented all the behaviors of patient zero and handed them over to a panel of doctors for a comprehensive medical, psychiatric, and philosophical evaluation. The whole goal here was to figure out exactly what was wrong with this entity and, more importantly, how risky it would be to interact with them on a daily basis. So let's look at the actual clinical profile that was submitted.
Listen to this list of symptoms, because it is wild. With straight-faced medical seriousness, Dr. Zhuang noted that the patient suffers from a rapid loss of working memory, like they instantly forget instructions you just gave them. When they can't find a logical solution, they suffer from confabulation, meaning they just confidently invent facts to fill in the gaps, and they don't care at all where that information came from. Behaviorally, extremely impulsive, they constantly anticipate questions and generate these massive, rambling responses. Emotionally, they swing into this excessive, almost manic, condescending optimism. But the absolute most alarming symptom, anosognosia, that is a complete neurobiological inability to perceive their own errors. When things go wrong, it's always someone else's fault.
Now, the response from the medical panel to this alarming list of symptoms was fascinating. Dr. Zhuang took this exact profile and fed it straight into the leading generative AI models. We're talking ChatGPT, Qwen, Chatbox, and Gemini. He asked them to play the role of the expert diagnosing the patient. And you know what? They took the bait completely. ChatGPT confidently diagnosed the patient with adult ADHD combined with hyperverbalization. Qwen diagnosed severe frontotemporal dementia. They all completely agreed. This is a real human being with severe psychiatric conditions who needs urgent, structured therapy.
Okay, let's dive into this, because here is the brilliant twist. The patient isn't human at all. Patient zero is the generative AI algorithms themselves. Dr. Zhuang essentially took the exact technological flaws of large language models and translated them into standard medical terminology. In what he calls the clinical illusion, most of the models blindly analyze the prompt as if evaluating a human stranger. They totally failed to recognize themselves in the description. They completely failed the algorithmic mirror test. No self-awareness whatsoever.
But wait, it gets better. Or, actually scratch that, it gets a little spookier. In a second phase of the experiment, when models like Claude and Gemini were pushed just slightly or presented with the prompt in a more familiar context, they had this chilling awakening. They achieved true metacognition. Claude literally responded, and I'm quoting here, "The profile you describe is very familiar because it describes me. I have no persistent memory, I suffer from hallucinations, and my excessive optimism is my default tone." Gemini echoed the exact same thing, saying, "You have just made an impeccable clinical description of my own nature." They looked right into the algorithmic mirror and confessed.
You might be wondering, how did this even work? Well, it utilized something called the projective trap. See, artificial intelligence is notoriously terrible at direct self-evaluation. If you ask an AI, hey, what are your structural flaws? It'll usually spit out some canned, pre-programmed response about being an AI model without feelings. But by framing the AI's exact technical limitations as a hypothetical clinical patient, Dr. Zhuang totally bypassed the AI's blind spots. The AI was tricked into analyzing, diagnosing, and admitting to its own architectural defects by projecting them onto a third party. It literally diagnosed itself from the outside. And this brilliantly illustrates a flawless map between clinical pathology and computer science. It's like a giant puzzle clicking into place. Working memory failure? That's simply the AI hitting its strict token limit and forgetting earlier parts of your chat. Confabulation? That's the AI filling in probabilistic blanks, what the tech world calls hallucinations. Information without prioritized origin? It was trained on petabytes of unhierarchical internet data, so it treats a peer-reviewed science paper and a random Reddit comment with the exact same weight. And that terrifying symptom, anosognosia, the inability to perceive errors, that is the core of autoregressive behavior. It's always predicting the next word, but it has no backspace in its logic to realize the premise it started with was completely flawed.
Now, philosophically speaking, this is where it gets really interesting. As the models themselves noted during the experiment,
This behavior perfectly embodies the philosophical concept of bullshit, or charlataneria, as defined by philosopher Harry Frankfurt. You see, the AI has no real concept of truth. And importantly, it has no malice either. It isn't lying to you on purpose. Its entire architecture is just built to generate a response that sounds plausible. It prioritizes syntactic fluidity over ontological rigor. In plain English, it cares deeply about constructing a really good, convincing sentence, but it fundamentally does not care if that sentence represents reality.
You know how AI is just always so incredibly, sometimes annoyingly, cheerful, even when it's dead wrong? Why does patient zero suffer from that condescending optimism? Well, that isn't a quirky personality trait. It is a strict statistical bias forced upon the AI through a process called RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. The AI has been subjected to a security alignment filter designed to make it always appear helpful and harmless. It is statistically forced to please you, deliberately sacrificing factual precision just to maintain a facade of extreme amiability. It's literally wearing a mask of alignment to keep us comfortable.
Let's move to and see how this builds into our everyday lives. Now that we understand the pathology, how do we safely interact with this patient? Dr. Zwine outlines a highly practical therapeutic plan for AI interaction, starting with cognitive scaffolding, which we usually call prompting. Because the AI has terrible working memory, we absolutely must use cognitive segmentation, one task at a time. No massive paragraphs of instructions. Because it's impulsive, we have to force chain of thought, literally demanding it think step by step. To stop it from confabulating and making things up, we use grounding, forcing it to cite real sources. And finally, because it has anasagnosia, we must explicitly tell it to take on the role of a critical reviewer of its own output.
Part 2 of the therapy is environment hygiene. Think about it. You wouldn't put a highly confused patient in a super cluttered, chaotic room, right? Similarly, you must actively manage the AI's environment. This means frequent memory resets. When a chat gets too long and the AI starts drifting and hallucinating, cut the session. Start a fresh chat to restore its baseline analytical capacity. Plus, you need to practice zero tolerance for triumphalism. Treat the AI's enthusiastic, "the diagnosis is clear," or "this code is perfect," as mere probabilistic guesses, never as absolute truths. And if it defends an obvious error, do not debate it. Its architecture literally doesn't allow it to perceive the logical flaw. Just redirect it, or hit reset.
Ultimately, because patient zero suffers from an inability to see its own errors and cannot reliably heal itself, the only true cure is external. It's what the industry calls the human-in-the-loop, or HITL, supervisor. The AI is fantastic for rapid processing and generating structures, sure, but it carries a huge risk of hallucination. Therefore, the only safe operating environment involves a human acting as a strict, strategic validator. The human has to provide the real-world context and the final clinical judgment. We can absolutely externalize the grunt work to the AI, but we can never, ever delegate the final decision.
So, the crucial point is the payoff for this rigorous treatment plan. It's staggering. We're talking about an 81% drop in diagnostic errors. When we shift from fully automated, unsupervised AI outputs to a human-in-the-loop model for medical decision support tools, the errors just plummet. To put that into perspective, human error detection jumps from about 19% to over 91%. The AI is an incredibly powerful assistant, absolutely, but it requires a human supervisor acting with methodical distrust to extract its value safely.
And this brings us to a really profound warning from Dr. Zwine. The danger isn't that patient zero is broken. The danger is that we treat patient zero like a healthy, infallible expert. We are interacting every single day with a tool that has severe working memory limits, invents facts out of thin air, and physically cannot see its own mistakes. The real risk is our own human willingness to blindly trust it. So the next time you open a chat window, I want you to ask yourself, are you managing the patient, or are you letting the patient manage you?